The Christmas Mystery by Jostein Gaarder. He's a Norwegian philosopher who wrote a number of interesting things, including the book Sophie's World, which is one of my favorites. And this book came out in 1996 when my children, Zach and Rachel, were 5 and 7 years old. And in the following 15 years, we read it every year at Christmas time, and it became a central part of our Christmas season celebration. The basic idea of the book is to tell a story written in the form of an Advent calendar. So there are chapters for each day of December. And so I want to read the chapters on each day. Today's December the 1st. And share with you the ideas and stories, some of the European history that's presented, etc. in the book. So we'll start off looking at the art. This particular version of the book has a marvelous set of illustrations by the artist Rosemary Wells. So I like that a lot. And we'll start each day with opening our little Advent drawer with a figure from the story. So let me direct your attention to our Advent calendar chest here, and we'll open it up and take out the drawer for the 1st of December, which has a figure in it of the lambkin being carried by a girl. She's going to figure in a prominent way in the story, as will the lamb. So we'll set that there to enjoy. And let's focus attention on reading the 1st of December. Each chapter starts with a little quote. It's good fun to try to listen carefully to hear when in the chapter that quote occurs, but I won't call out quote or anything. I encourage you to do that if you're watching this at home. Perhaps the clock hands had become so tired of going in the same direction year after year that they had suddenly begun to go the opposite way instead. Dusk was falling. The lights were on in the Christmas streets. Thick snowflakes were dancing between the lamps. The streets were crowded with people. Among all these busy persons were Papa and Joachim, who had gone into town to buy an Advent calendar. It was their last chance because tomorrow would be the 1st of December. They were sold out at the newsstand and in the big bookstore at the market. Joachim tugged his father's hand hard and pointed at a tiny shop window where a brightly colored Advent calendar was leaning against a pile of books. "There," he said. Papa turned back. "Saved." They went into a little bookshop that Joachim thought looked old and worn out. Books stood tightly packed on shelves along all the walls from floor to ceiling, all of them different. A large pile of Advent calendars lay on the counter. There were 2 kinds, one with a picture of Santa Claus with a sled and reindeer, and the other with a picture of a barn with a tiny little elf eating porridge out of a big bowl. Papa held up the 2 calendars. "There are plastic figures in this one and chocolate ones in that," he said, "but the dentist won't be happy about that." Joachim examined the two calendars. He didn't know which one he wanted. "It was different when I was a boy," continued Papa. "How do you mean?" "Then there was only a tiny picture behind each door, one for each day. But it was exciting every morning, trying to guess what the picture would be. Then we opened it. Well, we opened it, you see. It was like opening the door to a different world." Joachim had noticed something. He pointed to one of the walls of books. "There's an Advent calendar over there, too." He ran over to fetch it and held it up to show Papa. It had a picture of Joseph and Mary bending over the baby Jesus in the manger. The three wise men from the east were kneeling in the background. Outside the stable were the shepherds with their sheep and angels floating down from the sky. One of them was blowing a trumpet. The colors of the calendar were faded, as if it had been lying in the sun all summer. But the picture was so beautiful that Joachim almost felt sorry for it. "I want this one," he said. Papa smiled. "You know, I don't think this one's for sale. I think it must be very old, maybe as old as I am." Joachim wouldn't give up. "None of the doors are open." "But it's only here on display." "I want it," repeated Joachim. "I only want one that's like none of the others." The bookseller came up, a man with white hair. I guess I could be the bookseller. He looked surprised when he saw the Advent calendar. "Beautiful," he exclaimed, "and genuine, yes, original. It almost looks homemade." "He wants to buy it," explained Papa, pointing at Joachim. "I'm trying to explain that it's not for sale." The man raised his eyebrows. "Did you find it here? I haven't seen one like that for years." "It was in front of all the books," said Joachim. "Oh, it must be old John, up to his tricks again," said the bookseller. Papa stared at the man. "John?" "Yes, he's a strange character. He sells roses in the market, but where he gets them from, nobody knows. Sometimes he comes in and asks for a glass of water. In summer, when it's hot, he'll pour the last drops over his head before he goes out again. He's poured a few drops over me a couple of times, too. To thank me for the water, he sometimes leaves one or two roses on the counter, or he'll put an old book on the bookshelf. Once he put a photograph of a young woman in the window. It was from a country far away. Maybe that's where he comes from himself. Elisabet, it said on the photo. And now he's left an Advent calendar? Yes, evidently. There's something written on it, said Joachim. He read aloud, Magic Advent Calendar, price 75 ore. The bookseller nodded. In that case, it must be very old. May I buy it for 75 ore? Asked Joachim. The man laughed. I think you should have it for nothing. You'll see, old John had you in mind. Thank you, thank you, thank you, replied Joachim, on his way out of the bookshop already. Papa shook the bookseller's hand and followed Joachim out onto the pavement. Joachim hugged the calendar tight. I'll open it tomorrow, he said. Joachim kept waiting up that night, thinking about the bookseller and John and his roses. Once he went to the bathroom and drank water from the tap and thought of John pouring water over his head. Most of all, he thought about the magic Advent calendar. It was as old as Papa, but all the same, nobody had opened any of the doors. Before he went to bed, he found all the doors from 1 to 24. The 24th was, of course, Christmas Eve, and that door was 4 times bigger than the others, covering almost the whole of the manger in the stable. Where had the magic Advent calendar been for over 40 years? And what would happen when he opened the first door? When he woke up again and it was 7 o'clock, he reached up for the calendar, which was hanging above his bed, to open the first door. His fingers were so impatient and nervous that it was difficult to get hold of it properly. At last he managed to loosen a tiny corner, and the door opened slowly. Joachim gazed into a picture of a toy shop. Among all the toys and the people were a little lamb and a small girl. But he couldn't look at the picture in detail, for just as he opened the door, something fell out onto his bed. He bent down and picked it up. It was a thin sheet of paper, folded over and over. When he had smoothed it out, he saw that there was some writing on both sides. So he read what was on the paper. The lambkin. "Elisabet," her mother called after her. "Come back, Elisabet." Elisabet Hansen had been standing, staring at the big pile of teddy bears and furry animals, while her mother was buying Christmas presents for the cousins who lived at Toten. All of a sudden, a little lamb shot out of the pile. It jumped onto the floor and looked around. It had a bell round its neck, and the bell started to jingle in competition with all the cash registers. How could a toy suddenly come to life? Elisabet was so surprised that she started to chase the lamb. It was running across the wide floor of the department store in the direction of the moving staircase. "Lambkin, lambkin," she called after it. The lamb was already on the staircase, which was moving down to the floor below. The stairs moved quite quickly, and the lamb sprang even quicker, so that Elisabet had to run faster than the stairs and the lamb together if she was going to catch up with it. "Come back, Elisabet," repeated her mother severely. But Elisabet had already jumped out onto the staircase. She could see the lamb running through the ground floor where they sold underwear and ties. As soon as she had solid ground beneath her feet again, she went the same way as the lamb. It had managed to bound out onto the street, where the snowflakes were dancing among the chains of Christmas lights hanging above the street. Elisabet knocked over a stand of winter gloves and followed it. Out in the noisy street, she could hardly hear the bell jingling. But Elisabet did not give up. She was determined to stroke the lamb's soft fleece. "Lambkin, lambkin." The lamb sprang across the road against a red light. Perhaps it thought a red man meant go, and a green man meant stop. Elisabet thought she had heard that all sheep were colorblind. At any rate, the lamb didn't stop, so Elisabet couldn't stop either. She was going to catch up with the lamb even if she had to follow it to the ends of the earth. The cars tooted their horns, and a motorbike had to swerve onto the pavement to avoid colliding with Elisabet or the lamb. The people doing their Christmas shopping all stared. They didn't even see a little girl running across the road after a lamb. In any case, it was strange to be running after a lamb in the middle of winter. As they ran, Elisabet heard the church clock striking 3. She noticed it specially because she knew she had come to town on the 5 o'clock bus. Perhaps the hands had become so tired of going in the same direction year after year that they had suddenly begun to go in the opposite way instead. Elisabet thought that clocks too might get bored with doing the same thing all the time. But there was something else as well. When Elisabet had gone into the department store, it had been almost completely dark. Now it was suddenly light again, and that was curious, because there had been no night in between. It was as though the lamb had a chance. As soon as the lamb had a chance, it found a road leading out of town and trotted on towards a small wood. It sprang onto a path between tall pine trees. Now the lamb had to slow down a little, for the path was covered with all the snow that had been falling during the past 2 days. Elisabet went after it. It was difficult for her to run now, too. But the lamb had 4 legs, which were dragging in the snow, while she had only 2. Perhaps that would help her to gain on it. Her mother's cries had been drowned long ago by the noise in the street. Soon she couldn't even hear street sounds, but something was still ringing in her ears. Shall we buy this one or both of them? What do you think, Elisabet? Perhaps the reason the lamb had come to life and run away from the big store was that it could no longer bear to listen to the cash registers and the talk about buying and selling. And perhaps that was why Elisabet was following it. She had never enjoyed shopping. Joachim looked up from the sheet of paper that had fallen out of the magic advent calendar. What he had read was so amazing. He had always liked secrets. Now he remembered the little box with the key in it, the one Grandma had bought him in Poland. Mama and Papa had made him a solemn promise that they would never look for the key and open the box when Joachim was asleep or at school. It would have been as bad as opening someone else's letters, they had said. Up to now, Joachim hadn't had any secrets, real secrets, to hide in the box. But now he put the paper from the advent calendar there, turned the key, and hid it under his pillow. So when Mama and Papa woke up and came to look at the advent calendar too, they only saw the picture of the lamb in the department store. Do you remember? Asked Mama, looking up at Papa. It was just like that when we were small. Papa nodded. Then we could use our imagination on the little picture and make up the rest ourselves. It was much better than those plastic figures that end up being swallowed by a vacuum cleaner. Something was laughing inside Joachim. Only he knew that there had been a mysterious piece of paper inside the calendar. He pointed at the picture of the lamb. The lamb has decided to run away from the shop, he said, because it can't bear listening to the cash registers and the talk of buying and selling. But there's a little girl called Elisabet in the shop, and she's begun running after the lamb because she wants to stroke it. Isn't that just what I said? Said Papa. What does the boy want with plastic figures? For the rest of the day, Joachim wondered whether Elisabet would catch up with the lamb so that she could stroke its fleece. Would he find out tomorrow? For then there'd surely be another little piece of paper. And that's the end of the chapter for the 1st of December.